Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to call the WSESD board meeting to order. The meeting of the WSESD will come to order. This meeting is a hybrid meeting, which means that some or all of the public body is meeting remotely and some are meeting physically in previously noticed location where the public may attend to observe, listen, and participate contemporaneously. Please note that while we will strive to provide means for those attending remotely to participate in the public comment period, there may be technical difficulties or reasons that otherwise prevent or interrupt remote public participation. Therefore, it is important to note that the open meeting law only ensures the public's right to participate and comment at a public meeting by attending at the designated physical location as posted in the notice of agenda. If a member of the public or of the public body has technical difficulties accessing this meeting remotely, please alert us by email. In the event of a technical difficulty that cannot be resolved, we may continue the meeting if necessary to time and place certain. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting that are not unanimous will be done by roll call vote in accordance with law. So I don't have any amendments to the agenda, but I will be asking for any motions to amend the agenda. I will say that the agenda was amended a number of times during the early posting process because based on the needs of things that we needed to address. And so is there a motion to amend the agenda? Hearing none, we will move on to student matters. Are there any students in the on remote who would like to speak student matters? Okay.
I recognize all these people.
Okay, I will, just to be safe, I will ask a second time if there are any students who are hiding in Zoom that would like to raise their hand and let us know. And hearing no indication of such, we will move on to the administrative report. Mark?
Yeah, so we're excited to present the first draft of the budget tonight. Before we get into that, we have a new hire that Nancy is going to bring to the board.
So I would like to propose that we hire Jason Goldsmith to be our new auto shop teacher. He has 30 years experience in the automotive industry. He has a lot of training working on Audis and Volkswagens. But he also now has been working for Automall for the last 7 years. He's also run his own shop. So he has a good understanding of cars. His parents were both teachers. He's more than willing to complete the CTE teacher prep program, which is the way most CTE teachers become trained in their first 4 years. And he will have mentorship for his first semester because he's starting mid-year. We'll meet with him pretty much daily to make sure that things go the way they should be going.
Wonderful, thank you, Nancy. That information, I did receive information on the candidate, and that information was sent around to the board members. Is there a motion to approve the hiring of Jason Goldsmith?
So moved.
Thank you, Anne. Is there any discussion?
I'm just curious, is this a new position or is he replacing somebody?
He's replacing somebody who left mid-year.
Ruby?
I have two questions. One is there looks like there was only one applicant.
Yes.
So I wanted to kind of find out, is it just there was nobody, it was out there for a while and no one applied, or what
It
happened
was
there?
out there briefly because it's mid-year. We had one applicant. It is extremely hard to hire anybody out of business onto a teacher's contract because we pay less.
Yeah.
So literally he's taking a pay cut to decide to try and teach. And he's in his 50s. So he has decided that this is the time to give back. But to get somebody out of industry and they need to have 5 years of experience, we are asking people to take a pay cut at this point to come and teach, and that's not an easy thing to convince people to do.
And my second question, I reviewed it and he looks like a great hire. But I did notice that in the question that the board has asked to be, put in there around historically marginalized groups, he wasn't able to address it directly, in part because he doesn't have experience. So I'm wondering what support you'll be giving him in terms of kind of transitioning into a teaching position.
That's why he'll work with his mentor on a pretty much daily basis to begin with. Because he has not had teaching experience, period, but also, teaching's a hard gig. It's not something that's really easy to come into, and he's done a lot of training, of people who are hired as technicians in the business, in the businesses he's worked in and in his own shop. But that's not the same as teaching high school students, so.
Nancy, that question would be an opportunity to share a little bit about some of the professional development that the Career Center is undertaking.
Sure. So our focus, coming out of every 2 years, I have to do what's called the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment for the Perkins Grant. The last one we did was, we had to do fresh because the first one we did was during COVID. And the federal government asked everybody to redo and start from the very beginning. So by the time I collected all the documentation and wrote the report, I had over 500 pages worth of information. One of the things that came out of that data was that we have a number of courses that do not have representation of non-traditional candidates. So for instance, our LNA program and our daycare, or our early education program, I did not mean to say daycare, please don't repeat that, Kim Freeman. Our early ed program have very few males. Some of our other programs like auto, and until just this year, manufacturing, this year electrical, have very few female students or no female students. So, and Vermont is, well, our diversity numbers are not great. Our diversity numbers compared to Windham County don't look as I'll just say they're better than some of our sending schools in terms of diversity. And by diversity, I mean economic diversity. I mean in terms of race, color, all of our categories, even our LGBTQ+A. So we felt like we needed to do some work in that area. So our 4-year plan has been to participate in professional development that hopefully will increase our numbers. So we've spent the first 1.5 years looking at ourselves and looking at the students that we currently have and how our behavior is reflected in their education and the students who come to the center. And we felt like that was really important to do. And so then now we are in the process of planning some workshops to hopefully, or work days to hopefully attract some non-traditional students to programs that might really be interesting to them, but they don't take that risk. And what we've discovered is that needs to start at least in middle school and probably earlier, because often by the time they reach middle school or late middle school, they've already decided, I can't be a nurse because I identify as being male, which is so far from true that it's appalling, but it's kind of traditional of rural settings. So that's the work we're doing at the moment in our And so 2 of my teachers presented at the ACTE National Conference in Phoenix a few weeks ago, and they're also applying to participate at the NAEP or to present at the NAEP conference in Washington, D.C. in April. So. And I'm sorry, I didn't speak very articulate.
You spoke just fine. I mean, no, it's perfectly clear, and we all struggle with words
Off the
and
cuff.
how to express thoughts. And at the same time, we have to express the thoughts,
Right.
even as we stumble. We have to express them. So something, I know Ruby brought this up about the 3 questions.
Yeah.
And I noticed that as well. And I think to myself, wow, does someone really live in a vacuum? And we don't live in vacuums, we live in society. So even as the questions are very specific about maybe the classroom, they can be broadened out to life experience. And I appreciate the questions we're asking for a written response, but I would suggest in the interview process that we pick up on what is said or not said, because there are always what if situations. How would you handle and we have to think about what those what if questions are very, very carefully. But how would you handle a situation or overhearing something in the hallway? I think that's a way of broadening it out, to make sure that we really do tap into someone's core, who they are as a human being. I just want to suggest that. That's for everybody, as we consider candidates.
And I did ask Jason as part of the interview process. First of all, I have to tell you that we did the interview in two sections. My level 2 class, automotive class, interviewed with me and one other adult. The candidate first gave him a tour of the shop, talked about what they knew, he talked about what he knew, what his theories on teaching them were going to be, and how he planned to move forward if he took the position. I then interviewed him with 2 other adults, in the process of which we asked questions somewhat like that, and I asked him to delve into the 3 questions because I had gotten even less in writing on those. And so I feel very confident that he's going to build really good relationships with students. Having said that, no, none of us live in a vacuum. But I am not sure that most organizations, most trade organizations necessarily, and when I say trade organizations, I mean trade organizations in Vermont or in this part of Vermont, necessarily think about diversity as much as we think about diversity in education. And so sometimes I think that question catches people in a place that they feel really vulnerable and worry about speaking on. And that's just my gut reaction on that. His mom was a teacher in Dummerston for many years, and it turns out his dad actually worked here for a while. So I think he is a good candidate. I think he, and I think I know that the students in my automotive class cannot go for months without a teacher being in place. And the current sub-situation is not gonna hold them very long. So,
Anyone else from the board who would like to?
I have one.
and I don't feel like he's a compromise hire. Sorry.
I have experience with the Career Center, from Cambridge High School. We had one where they did hairdressing, nail tech. You could become a hairdresser, a nail tech, nursing assistant. And it was amazing for foster kids because a lot of us never have like that full experience of high school. So to be able to have a career out the bat was so amazing. So I think that what us having a career center is really magical, especially for our rural area. What I wanted to ask, since I did bring the hairdressing and the nail tech, I have noticed in my research of career centers, it almost seems like that trade of like that humanistic trade of like nails and hair and things like that I don't want to say all girls are interested, all women are typically interested in, but there's definitely an interest of women and then also boys as well. And I'm wondering, has that ever come to the career center, like people wanting to do like esthetician, hair?
And we used to have a cosmetology program. We don't anymore, in part because historically, and that's all I can speak to because the program wasn't here when I started, what my research shows is that it was run and ended up kind of being a feeder program into local school, cosmetology school. And that's really not the way it should run. But then in the state of Vermont, what happens is we are not centers that run we're not a separate high school. Like most Massachusetts, for instance, tech centers are a separate school and people go for their 4 years of high school to the technical center high school. So our students on a half-day program do not get enough hours to meet the Vermont licensing requirements. And then when they graduate, if they go to a school of cosmetology, they end up being forced to start again rather than being able to use the hours that they've already earned. And so that's a huge issue. We're not graduating them with prepared for a career, to start a career. And we're forcing them to they're being forced to redo work. We're not forcing them to, but they're being forced to redo work that they've already put in. And that's not fair. Sorry, it just plain isn't fair. And it costs them money and it costs them time, and that's not what career and technical education should be about. So most cosmetology programs in Vermont, or pretty close to all at the moment, are run by full-day centers where students go for the full day and can spend 2 years earning that time and graduate a credit or with that certification.
Any more very quick questions before we move on, or are we ready to, okay? So a motion has been made. All those in favor of approving the new hire, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, so we will move on to the budget. Hand it to Frank.
Okay, we have hard copies of the budget before you, and I also do have a staffing FTE document. Maybe if you pass that around as well. Send that around. So I'll give you an overview, and sure Mark and others on the leadership team have some comments, but I thought I would start with what the Finance Committee has reviewed over the last several weeks. And let's see, I can also share my screen. Is that enabled, Paul?
Are we skipping the MLSS follow-up? Okay,
Yes.
just wanted to make sure.
It's a different agenda on mine.
Okay, I'm looking at the most recently emailed one. Just wanted to make sure that was.
Okay, so thank you, Paul. So I've got the summary document shared as well. So what we're looking at is since November 21st, pretty much every Tuesday, the Finance Committee has looked at different components of the budget proposal. And so tonight reflects the compilation of elementary, secondary spending, the revenue assumptions. We've added the estimated tax implications, and then we've made some assumptions around funding the capital plan. So this is pretty much a comprehensive initial draft, and as I say, the Finance Committee has essentially seen all the components, but here we are, assembling the first draft in its entirety this evening. Here's our overview. On the first page, you see the proposed budget, $65,707,000, and that's up 1.7 million, or a little less than the inflation rate of 2.8%. That is compared to the current budget, which goes through June of 2024, so that's what we call fiscal year 24, $63,919,000. And as you can see on the summary page, we had planned on reducing fund balance by $950,000 in the current year. And in the proposed year, we're proposing a level funded where our revenues equal our expenditures. And we do have a lot of capital projects coming up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's part of the rationale for that. The graph at the bottom of the page, the summary page, shows kind of the distribution of the investment. As you would expect, most of the budget is dedicated to direct instruction. Also note on the left side where we have another 19% of the budget, that wedge, that other darker blue, is our special education services, supportive instruction, and primarily it's the assessment from the supervisory union. And we just reviewed that earlier at the supervisory union meeting, and that's primarily special education services. So in total, direct instruction, special ed is considered direct instruction. You can see that we are approximately 70% going into direct instruction. The other investments are noted. They're simply a depiction of the fiscal figures there, where we have supportive instruction, we have support of our faculty for professional development and so on. There's board and administrative services, and then a very tiny sliver at the top of the page for debt service. Used to be a lot larger, but it's quite small now. And fairly significant investment in the maintenance, as you see in the green. A few more kind of highlights for you. The second page of the document kind of gives you the very summary level statistics. So we just talked about spending up 2.8%. Tax rates, projected tax rates, going from $1.51 to $1.59, assuming a lot of current statistics remain as they are. Most of the statistics we're relying on at this point were embedded in the tax commissioner's letter that we talked about that sets a yield. And then just recently, the weighted average ADM, average daily membership of our student enrollment. So we've just recently integrated that into our school funding formula calculations, and we'll spend a little bit more time on that tax calculation because it's nuanced because of Act 127, but we'll come back to that. And then that next line shows you just how dramatically different the Act 127, its impact is on spending per whatever the state defines the per. And in this case, you're seeing the current budget, $23,418. We're actually spending a little bit more than we did per student if you just take total budget divided by total number of kids. But the state has redefined the funding formula. We report to them approximately 2,500 kids, and now they're giving us a statistic back of 3,721. You see those numbers right there, a couple lines down. So when you take a much higher student count and you divide it into spending, you're going to get a lower spending per student. And that's what you see with the 15,707. But those are very different calculations, but it is the path forward for all public schools in Vermont. Major cost drivers that are within the $65 million proposal. The largest, which you would expect, we are in the business of teaching and supporting students, so it is in the payroll, salary and wages. Last year, you see a reference to having added 9 positions, which would be this current budget. We were planning for last year. That's what we had proposed. Our voters had approved that. This year, it's just essentially a net of a number of small adjustments, but net of 1 additional employee. And then there is about approximately a 4.4% average salary increase. And so that's where you see, if you added up all the salaries, you would see they are up $791,000 from the prior year. The total increase, you remember we said is 1.7 million, right? That's the 2.8%. Well, there's $1 million of it right there. It's in the health insurance. See the next line? So the vast majority of our increase is in health insurance costs. That's all part of what the state legislature has taken responsibility for. It's no longer within the school board's purview to negotiate for health insurance or set levels of benefits, set premium costs, set employee share. None of that is within our jurisdiction. It is now assigned to a health commission, and that was created under Act 11. They're projecting 16% increase in the premiums. The third sort of significant spending increase that is embedded in this budget is those services required to support our students with individual education plans, and that is part of what we were just looking at on the first page under the supervisory union services. So that's passed to the districts based on the structure the legislature has created for supervisory unions. Okay, a couple more kind of overview points and then turn it over to some other folks. There is an offset, we're not up 2.6 million and there are other increases. We're only up 1.7. Well, one reason why we are not up more than 1.7 million is because we've made our last payment on the bond, the 20-year bond that was sold in 2003 to build this beautiful room right here and about 3 acres of new roofs. When you look right out that window, along with all those things that we've talked about in terms of the capital plan. So we are making major investments in sustaining this very nice asset that the community supported all those years ago. And then finally, you can see our enrollment is quite stable. There's some pluses and minuses, but overall very, very stable. Total enrollment 2,398 this year, 2,402 And this is not getting into too many nuances of how to define a student. This is pretty much what you would expect if you went to every classroom and counted all the kids in the classrooms. These are the basic statistics. And then I had just handed around a single sheet that we can talk about, maybe not, don't need to this evening unless you have questions, but you see that last statistic, or second to last statistic on this highlight page. 435 staff members in the proposed budget, 434 staff members in the current budget, and this single page document gives a little more detail on that. Okay, next I thought I'd provide a little tour of the state funding formula. How did we calculate the tax impact? And then maybe we can jump into a program discussion and what are our priorities and how will this affect our students?
Can I just ask a question before we go on? I'm sorry if this seems really beginnerish, but when you said that you have created a level funded budget where the revenues equal the expenditures, even though we have significantly less federal revenue than we did last year because of the ESSER funding. How did you do that?
So
where did you get all the other money?
Yeah, great question. And actually, you're going to see that in this next schedule. But in one sentence, we always balance our budget through the education fund. So if we lose money from grants or let's say tuition or some other source other than taxpayer funds, then we make it up in the education fund requests. We ask the ed fund for more money.
Okay.
Yeah, and that balances our budget.
Really great stuff, Frank. I'm wondering, in terms of the proposed budget by functions percentage, if you have any knowledge comparatively to other districts, if our breakdown, our percentages are similar to other districts, or if there's variances, and if there are variances, why?
Yeah, great question. We have been fairly typical. A state average direct instruction has been right around 62, 63%. We tend to spend a little bit more on intervention and support, primarily because we are higher generally poverty than most of our peers in the state. So, but that is somewhat typical.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
So this next document is hard to read. It's kind of a hybrid creation of the state of Vermont. It is required to be in the annual reports. It is something that we do include in the annual report. Probably the most interesting number here is how did we get to the projected tax rate? So Act 127 says you look at your tax rate on two passes. And so the first pass is under the convention of just calculating your spending, identifying your sources of revenue. So like Robin, you just asked that question, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we know the spending 65 million. We'll talk a little bit about sources of revenue other than the ed fund. So we come up with that number. And then it's simply we divide that number by number of kids and we get that cost per student. The reason why the tax commissioner's letter is so important is because he announces the yield, he or she announces the yield. We compare our spending to the yield. The yield number is 9,400 something, it's at the top of this page, 9,452, okay? So we compare our number to that number. Every state, every public school in the state does that. If we spend $9,452 per student, then our tax rate would be 1. if we spent whatever 9,452 times 2 is, what is that, like 19,000 something, 18,800 something, right? Then our tax rate would be $2, right? Because that's exactly twice 9,452. But our number is 15,707. That's our cost per student based on these funding formulas and the way we define things. 15,707 is 166% bigger than 9,452, right? It's that, just your third grader can do that math. And that's your tax rate, $1.66. That's the first pass at it under Act 127. That is 9% higher, 9.5% higher than the current tax rate, even though we're only spending 2.8% more. But the reason why it's so much higher is because, Robin's question, we don't have as much revenue that is non-ed fund. And if we ask the ed fund to make it up, that pushes up the tax rate, because the tax rate tries to appropriate enough money to balance everybody's budget in the state of Vermont. If we look at our grand list, I don't want to say too much more about that, but if we look at our grand list, Sean's raised this point a number of times, our grand list only raises about a little over half of what voters approve us to spend. And we have to ask the ed fund to make up the difference. Some towns, like Stratton, they raise 5-10 times more than they need to run their school. That money is helping us. But so because there are so many changes with waiting, losing federal funding, dealing with the pandemic, all of the goals and the challenges that we've all faced, the state said, we know there's too much to responsibly anticipate and resize your staff. So we're going to give you a hold harmless provision this fiscal year 25. And that is, if you spend and you impact your tax rate between 5% and 10%, we're going to subsidize anything over 5%, bring you back down to 5%. So that's what I presented here in the bold $1.59. So if they didn't do that, we would be $1.66, and this team wouldn't be presenting a tax increase to the public at 9.5%. That's not doable. But we do think that, given all of these changes and the fact that we are still trying to retain 15 positions that were funded in, 14 positions that were funded in ESSER on the local tax rate, we feel that we do need to make that investment, and we feel that the 5% tax increase is warranted. We'll also note that in this same document, that $1.59 is still substantially less than the tax rate if you look at the first column, $1.71. That's fiscal year 22. Right? So we're still a lower tax rate with this proposal than we were 3 years ago, three budget periods ago. So from a fiscal responsibility point of view, administration has felt, given the needs of our students, that this is a responsible plan.
I guess I just want to make sure what I'm understanding what you're hearing. What I'm hearing. So the cap, the 5% cap. So it looks like ours is 9.5. We were just under the kind of the window of 5 to 10. That's just for this year. And so, is there a plan? Is there a thought about? I know this is a big question, but I'm just wondering, where do we go from here? Or do we have a plan for increasing revenue, or are we going to be saying in the next cycle we need to tighten our belts, more than we are?
The Act 127 perpetuates this 5% cap for the next 4 years. So if we are in the same situation next year, as long as we're in that range, we would be capped at 5%. You know, most of us, I would assume in this room, would consider a 5% tax increase for the next 4 years really difficult for our community. So, you know, it's a great question. We absolutely will be looking at ways to bring us back to what we've traditionally done, which is stayed within an inflation rate in terms of tax impact. Keep in mind that the next couple of lines down are even more important if you're talking about fiscal responsibility in terms of how a school board budget impacts citizens, and that is that line 34, income cap percent. I believe 70% of Vermonters don't pay based on a property tax rate, they pay based on income. And that's part of the school funding law. And this proposal, very preliminarily, would project a income sensitivity cap of 3%. Current year, you see that number on line 34 is 2.67%. So an example would be if you make $50,000 in household income, you're not going to pay any more than 3% of $50,000 or $1,500. Even if your property tax, in the event that you lived in a house and it was assessed at $300,000 and that was a $4,000 tax bill, you're only going to pay the $1,500 in that example. Couple other things that I'll share and then maybe move along. The next data point here is enrollment. So we talked about that. It is by grade level and it's over a couple of year periods. So that's where you see a stable enrollment. And then the following page speaks to what Robin was pointing out, and that is revenue. So this page 5, I have it on the screen here as well, are various lines of revenue, and you see the largest increase there, 11.8%. That's what I was talking about, Robin. We're asking for a lot more money from the ed fund because of this 67% drop, and the second line down, the $3.1 million drop. We're going from $4.6 million in grant and sub-grants down to 1.5. So that, if we don't have another revenue source, meaning all of the Stratton, Dover, and Marlboro kids come to BUHS, that would be another $2 or $3 million in tuition revenue. If we don't have that sort of incoming additional revenue, then we have to run a balanced budget. And we have to ask that from the ed fund. That's what goes into that tax calculator. So there's our revenue picture. I mentioned fund balance. We are in a fiscally sound position. Here is on the bottom of that page 5, you see our general fund. Assuming we do run the $950,000 planned deficit this year, we would end up with $3.5 million in the general fund. And we, as you know, we have a number of projects going on. We'll talk more about that at another meeting, but we're planning on using $1.4 million of the capital fund. So over the next couple of years, we will fully consume that capital fund that we've been working to build over the many years.
So I feel as if I might want to ask this question privately and not publicly, but here goes. So every time we go to the education fund to compensate for a deficit, we have a consequence.
Can I just interrupt right there?
Yes.
It's not to compensate for a deficit.
Okay.
A deficit means generally an unplanned shortfall of revenue versus expenditures, and we don't have those.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in order to balance
Okay,
our budget.
Yeah.
We borrow money from the education fund, or the education fund makes up the difference
by law.
by law.
Yeah.
But the consequence of that is an increase in taxes locally.
Gotta come from somewhere. Yep. That's how the education fund gets its money.
Okay.
It
All right.
is based on how much we spend, all across the state. But for those communities that don't have a grand list that meet the voters' mandate to spend, the ed fund will balance the budget. And that is our case. We approve budgets of $60 million and we probably raise maybe 35 million. I haven't looked at those statistics. That's a Lister town office reconciliation that, thank goodness, I don't have to get into, but that's that.
And then we're left with having to persuade taxpayers that that was a good thing as their taxes go up.
That's right, they can say no and they can tell us to cut our budget. Yeah, and that's absolutely the cycle for town meeting. And that's why this is so important that we talk about our needs, we talk about our plans to meet the needs, the expended, the cost to provide the services, and the rationale why the tax rate is a good investment for our citizens. Eva?
So when you take money from the educational fund,
So-
and it
Just be careful. I'm sorry. I just want to help folks understand. This is Act 60, and then it's Act 68, and then it's an amendment. So this is just law, and it's not us taking.
okay.
It's the school funding formula deriving these statistics that quantify the amount that the state must send to any public school based on a board spending plan.
Okay.
Can I just reframe something
Sorry, I was
that you're saying?
Oh, sorry.
To add to that, Frank, that like this is what it's for. This is what the educational fund is supposed to be for, is to equalize spending across the state so that we aren't in a position like some other states are, where towns that have high poverty have to do with less for their schools, and towns that have a lot of wealth just can spend as much as they want. The whole point of the education fund is to equalize the amount that students have spent on them across the whole state. So it's not like it's a misuse of the money for us to be using this fund.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. So you had said that the town of Stratton put money into it, and I was wondering since Stratton's putting money into it, do their taxes go up since they're putting money? Oh, so it affects everybody.
It absolutely affects everybody, yeah. And it is the same calculation that we just went over. It's Stratton only has 30 kids, and they cut a check to tuition. They don't run a school. So that, 30 kids, probably somewhere around $20,000 a kid, $500,000. That's their budget, $500,000. Ours is 65 million. Theirs is $500,000, probably. But their cost per student is it's not how much they spend. They spend $500,000, we spend 65 million. But they're gonna raise a lot more money than we are because it's how much you spend, just like we did. If it's 20,000, I don't know if it is or not, but it probably is. So they take 20,000 divided by 9,400. We do the math here and we know their tax rate, but that's somewhere around, nearly 2, right? A little more than a $2 tax rate. So they're gonna go to their grand list, which is huge. It's so much bigger than ours, even though they only have 30 kids. 2.13. Their tax rate will be 2.13 on their grand list. And that's gonna raise probably 15 million. They only need 500,000. And so they're gonna cut a check to the ed fund. And thank goodness, we're gonna have the benefit of that, as Robin was clarifying. That is the equalization formula. I was the school business manager for Stratton for many years, so I know their business. And I remember that day. I remember that day, 1998. They said, "Are you guys kidding me? They had a 10-cent tax rate. So $1 million home, 10-cent tax rate. And then Act 60 passed, and the state said everybody starts at $1. So their tax rate went up 1,000%, and they were not very happy with the business manager. I was just the messenger. But that is how we equalize opportunity across the state, is that Killington, Stratton, Mount Snow, Dover, any of the economic engines that have property wealth are contributing to the whole state. But if we went out and spent $40,000 per student, it would create a huge tax rate, but our folks can't pay it because they'd be income sensitized, they'd be capped. And you can see that would make Stratton have to pay even more, because that's what the yield does. The yield says, what do we think the state's gonna spend on public ed? 2.6 billion, something like that. And then they say, well, how much property value is there in the state? And then they say, well, we've got to set a yield that will raise enough money to fund 2.6 billion. And that's the way it works. So, great question. John?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you just mentioned the yield number, and why exactly has it been reduced to 38% or 38%? That has to do with the whole weighting formula?
My guess is, so I have not had an opportunity to talk with the joint fiscal office or the tax commissioner, but my guess is what they had a preliminary analysis based on the UVM research and all of the effort that went into identifying the weighting system, which took what was once a 0.2 for poverty, I think 0.25 weight for poverty, now it's a 1. So they made that 4 times more impactful, right? My guess is they were able to estimate what would happen back in December 1st, before all the kids got counted and before all of this stuff is now getting figured out. And they said, well, I bet you if we apply all of these rates, the kid count's gonna go up 40%. And if that's the case and property values remain somewhere in the middle, then the yield can go down 40%, because it's a simple math formula. That's all it is. And if one goes up 40% or one goes down 40%, the other one better go up as an offset. That's my guess. Our own numbers are changing by more than 60%, our own enrollment numbers, right? If we were, right there on the page, the tax page, we were about 2,200 students, and now we're 3,700, right? So 2,200 minus 3,700, 1,500 students divided by 2,200. Our enrollment went up 70%. Now we know we have the same number of kids. And that's why we are able to get past this storm by losing $3 million in revenue, having a level enrollment. Well, it's because they gave us 70% more counts on the kids, but they only cut our denominator, our yield, by 40%. So the math is in our favor.
To kind of harken back to the conversation we had with Emily Kornheiser and the letter from the agency of ed or whoever, that letter that we got.
Tax commissioner letter.
Tax commissioner letter, thank you. So I feel like at our last meeting, there was a moment where it was kind of like, we don't know, things are still up in the air. We don't know where this is gonna land. It could be worse for us than we thought.
That's right.
That was the last meeting.
Yep.
So this is more hard figures, right?
Well, not from Emily's point of view. And she was putting it in the context last meeting, on the 12th here, that, yeah, you're gonna get your weighted average statistics, but we still don't know how much rooms and meals taxes are gonna come in. We don't know what the CLA numbers are. Those are direct correlations to these numbers. So the legislature will set the yield. That is by law. The commissioner only is doing an analysis to help this conversation happen right now. It's only a recommendation. So yes, I would hope by mid-January we would have a sense from the legislature if they have a reasonable degree of confidence in that 9,456.
And that will be before we finalize this budget?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we'll be in touch. Doesn't mean that it's a commitment, it's an indicator.
I think it's fair to say we feel a lot better about how the numbers are playing out this week than we did last week. With the unknown of last week.
Right. Last thing I wanted to mention is the capital plan. I have it up here on the screen, and it is page 10 in this packet. We mentioned that we paid off the one that it was at one time a $55 million bond, and you see fiscal year 25 we have a fairly significant increase in planned projects. The largest investment you see there is in heating and ventilation. Kelly, if you can mark January 9th agenda, I would like to have the board consider the bid award for the Oak Grove heating project. We did have 2 bids. Remember, we were obligated to accept the lowest responsible bid. And anyways, that's estimated to be over a $2 million project in itself. We also see we have a lot of roofing to come up there, 1.6 million. So 6.1 million in capital projects. Here's how it's dispersed over the schools in the second half, same 6.1 million, but it's by site. And then within this budget that you have, this $65 million budget, you see that line, 2.8 million there. Appropriation under the sources of funds, that is in this budget plan. And you can see through 2025, we're going from a $4.8 million reserve fund down to maybe 300-something thousand. That's what the reserve has been for. We've known that this day is coming. We expect that given all of the substantial investments we've made with the ESSER money, that we're going to be in good shape, and fortunately the state has that hold harmless provision that brings us back. It's continuing to subsidize this investment, right? It brings us back to a tax rate that's less than 2 years ago. So we'll have a lot more detail on that at our next meeting, but that's an overview.
Okay, so the time we had budgeted was until 7:05, but we want to make sure that we have all the questions answered if we have any more questions. So does anyone else on board have any questions?
When does the Independent Budget Review Committee produce its report?
They've been joining the finance committees regularly. I don't know if we have anybody on Zoom with us from that group, but typically they wait until the board is voted on the budget, and that's end of January.
Ruby?
I don't have the agenda in front of me, but is this the moment where we talk about the board budget piece?
Later on in the agenda, yes.
Okay, that's later, and Frank will be here for that period, or is
We
Frank
can talk about it now.
disappearing?
If you would like to talk about it, let's
Well, yeah, that would be great, because I think that.
let's just try, I wanted to, I can move that portion up, but if you can hold on to your question on that, just hold. Jody, did you have a question?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Jody
You are.
Norman from Dummerston. Frank, I'm assuming that this is the SD budget, and I would like you to explain how the SU budget is going to affect us and affect that page of percentages and what we pay and all that other stuff that you were just talking about.
Sure, glad to do that. I just unshared, but I think I'll share the screen again. We'll look at a couple of different pages. So just this evening, after several weeks of budget review, the SU board approved the budget, and that assumption is in this line item. Let's see, right here, I've got it highlighted, and what we're looking at is, and I shared my spreadsheet as opposed to the what is it called, but I don't think that matters. The PDF that's on. So I've got my own notes here indicating, some of the drivers of costs that are higher than what we're accustomed to. As I say, normally the SU assessment is similar. And by the way, folks, I'm looking at the first page of your handout. It's just my spreadsheet version of that. Yeah, and we're looking at the 2,500 support services, special ed, central administration. This line item represents that 14% of the budget, which we said is primarily special education services. And what we have here is an additional, the reason for this significant increase in the assessment is we have an additional English language learner position included in the supervisory union budget. Now, everything there, Jody, needs to be assessed once we remove the revenue assumptions that come with the spending, right? The SU employs and then implements the program. We receive any relevant state aid, so we deduct that from the cost, and then we have to assess the difference from the SU level to Vernon and to the Windham Southeast School District. So we have the additional ELL teacher. We have an additional inclusion coordinator that works with our diversity equity program at the supervisory union. This is why the assessment is up higher than what would be typical. We also have an additional pre-K coordinator at the SU level. That these positions were formerly funded by ESSER funding, and just like the SD, that's not available, so the reimbursement has to go through a assessment. There's also an additional pre-K teacher. The plan is to open the Canal Street School back up to a public pre-K. So we have an additional instructor. So those positions are raising the local share of the assessment. They're not all new positions. It's just that where some of them were formerly funded by federal pandemic grant are now being funded through the local. So this budget proposal with the 2.8% total increase, it includes the SU assessment.
The budget that you're talking about right now, this SD budget includes the SU assessment?
That's right.
And includes its central office and administrators and everything?
That's right, yes, yeah. the supervisory union budget is, as you're saying, it is primarily special education, but it includes the supervisory union office, the business office, it includes technology, includes curriculum and assessment, includes the, as we said, the English language learner, diversity, equity, all of those functions, technology, I don't know if I said that already, but yeah, all of those functions. And yes, that is included in this $65 million proposal, which is up to 2.8%.
Okay, thank you. I was just concerned about whether that was added on to this or not for the total, for the budget total going up. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so if there are no more questions on that portion, then we can jump to the board's budget. Did you bring a copy of just the snapshot of the board?
It's on page 155.
All right, so then,
It actually begins on the last line on page 154.
Can I go ahead?
yes. Go.
So Kelly had asked us to review it to prepare for this conversation, and I had a few questions, and I'm anticipating that they're not really for Kelly, they're for Frank and Mark. So some of them might be pretty simple, but I'll ask them. So on page.
If I could just also help folks that 155 for the accounting page number, the document is also got a page number on the portrait, and it's 175. If it just so folks don't get confused.
Oh.
Okay, so you don't want.
Depending on which corner you're looking at.
Yeah.
Down at the bottom.
In the portrait,
I think if
Here.
Oh, I see. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. and that's the 175 is the one that we will put a page reference on the front like we usually do in the annual report.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
So there's a line item, other professional services, that I think that the proposed is 135,000. I wanted to understand what that includes, what it means, and particularly, does it include legal services? And is this where any legal, the payment of legal expenses related to this sexual abuse investigation live, or is that in a different line item?
That is where it lives, yeah.
Okay.
And it is primarily legal. Yeah.
Okay. And our expectation is that that's, I don't feel equipped to say whether that's adequate. Do we feel that that's an adequate budget? Maybe you can't answer, maybe
No,
nobody
I would
can
have
answer.
no opinion on that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's a concern, but that's good to know. And then right below it, advertising. I'm wondering why that budget is so high.
We've had a lot of turnover, it's custom part of the pandemic, and fortunately, I think we are seeing that come down. Let's see, advertising.
So that's advertising related to the board?
Oh no, it's the general advertising for new hires.
Got it. Okay, so this is just district.
Can I also say that I'm wondering whether when we've needed to advertise for Frank, are you meaning new hires for the school district?
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if maybe when we've had to do advertisements for new board members, that's also contributed to that as well. Am I correct that would be included in there?
Yeah. Any kind of advertising.
So we have had to do some of that too.
I guess that's helpful. I think that when we were shown a snapshot of this, my thought was that this was if we're talking about a board budget, understanding what specific line items are really, we might feed into that, but that's not, we're not, you know, it's not all of our budget. So that's just good to know. But,
Before you move on from
Yeah.
that one, so the board absorbs the cost of advertising for district hires?
Remember that uniform chart of accounts that we all love? That dictates where we record costs. So, the board is considered the employer, so, you know, it goes there. Could we put it in, say, school administration? Probably. I could look into that. That's just been the tradition based on a lot of years of past practice.
So not all of these are school board related things.
Well,
They're
they
to support new hiring
Yeah.
staff
and we do hire.
to run our school district.
I mean, but like that, all 175 pages are things that are supporting our school district. This little section here isn't limited to expenses to support the board itself. That's what I'm clarifying.
Yeah, the vast majority of the 263,000 is, but yeah, advertising is probably the least, something that the board would direct. But basically everything else the board directs, you know, the use of the professional services, and the school board supplies is generally from one of the board members, you know, incurring a transaction. The dues and fees is a legacy of when the board was a member of VSBA, but VSBA has now assessed supervisory unions only, so we could delete that. That is really not.
Except that we have now, we do need to leave some in for subscriptions.
Yeah.
So-
But
Yeah, and that could
hardly
be a-
ever
But
has it.
not that much, but I don't think we can't totally eliminate it. Right.
Yeah, and that probably should be a supply. The subscriptions should probably a supply.
I don't feel like anyone here is gonna be able to predict the amount that we will actually need for legal services. So do you feel like it's okay if we just leave how it is, and like, if it ends up that there is more cost than what is reflected here, that we'll somehow be able to pay for that out of another part of the fund, or?
I think if you know, the budget's always an estimate, but it should be based on your best assessment of what's likely. And if you have no other basis to change the 135,000, then what would happen if we didn't utilize it? As I do every year, I would come to you in July, August and say, fiscal year is closed. We're authorized to spend 65 million. We only spend 64.5, you know, hypothetically. I'm recommending that you transfer a surplus into the capital reserve fund because we have, 14 million in projects over the next 5 years. So that's the consequence of leaving a number that doesn't actually get fully utilized. It is possible if you go over the 135,000, then obviously I wouldn't be coming to you asking to transfer a surplus. We would be likely drawing on the fund balance.
Okay.
And that figure, that line was increased, I seem to recall, sometime fairly recently by the board.
It was, yeah. We actually spent 192,000, as you see on the document, in the 12-month ending June 2023.
Ruby, did you have more questions?
Oh, yeah.
Matt, did you have a question that has to do with something that's been asked right now, or is it some, that's,
It sort of goes off of the last,
okay.
Frank's last statement about the capital fund and what we do potentially with the surplus. I'm curious if that 14 million that we're projecting, are we in projecting out in future fiscal years, right, for those capital funds?
Yeah.
Is the slope to getting to where we need to be gradual, or will we be looking at a spike when we get to that fiscal year for that
No.
amount?
No, we're definitely going through a very planned
Awesome.
process of, we've been spending between 3 and 4 million a year, and it's just the fact that so many improvements were done in 2003, and so much of that has a 20-year life.
Yeah.
So we are definitely spending more. We have been spending more, and we will spend more than the next decade.
Brilliant.
Just to finish off the advertising, it feels to me like we could carry over that 4,500, but it feels like the most logical thing is to turn to the HR director and to Mark to say, it's balls in your court in terms of setting that, because it is more than what we, plan for, alone. So then the next thing is the printing and binding. Does that include all of the printing for annual report?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the primary, yeah.
That's a big part of it. So there's a really substantial jump between the 23 actual and the adopted 24.
Mhm.
So can you explain that jump?
That number, it probably again represents a historical cost. We used to include the audit report in the annual report, so it would be over 200 pages. Last couple of years, board said, nope, we can do a summary audit, and we've cut it in half. So I think that as long as the board's comfortable with that format, we could do the same. And this year, you could cut that number in half.
And so the thing that you're describing with the summary is the slightly less than 5,000 cost for printing?
Yep, yeah, and which generally includes the postcard mailer, and some years, some folks want to do multiple mailers, sometimes just one, so that, I think it's about almost $1,000 per mailer with postage and printing.
Okay. Well, then I think that would be something it's either to consider now or to go one more year and make a determination if we want to reduce it drastically. And then the next question I have is travel. I don't understand why that's so low. What does travel mean?
If you go to the VSBA conference, and you go to Lake Murray and travel back, that might be $100 kind of thing.
Yeah, so that's travel that is specifically related to the board.
That is right.
Okay. And my guess is even just the number of cars that went back and forth to Lake Maury alone, and there may be other times when the chair and the vice chair and the superintendent travel to a conference, that seems really low. And I think it's important for us as a board to make sure we're investing in our own professional development, and that includes making sure that travel compensation, or like just reimbursement for travel is there. So I question whether that should be, just increased, just like put in 1,000 just as a benchmark for a few years and see how that goes and whether or not we hit it, or 500 or 600, whatever it is. But it just feels we're underserved in that budget line item.
I think that's a good idea, and it shouldn't limit you from traveling and going to workshops, like the VSBA in the fall, that likely was absorbed through the superintendent's office, like those costs.
So then when you consider travel, are you simply talking about mobility, or are you talking about accommodations?
Is that what you're
It would be
overnight?
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
travel and conference.
Yeah, either one.
Yeah, hotel.
So it would include overnight stay?
Yeah.
Could, yeah.
Okay, then that figure is way off base.
Unless as Mark's saying, it's absorbed by the superintendent's office, which it sounds like it was, particularly the overnight accommodations and registration for them.
But I think increasing that with a benchmark figure of whatever, 1,000, 1,500, and then see how it tracks.
Where does the board retreat budget and the admin retreat budget live?
So board retreat should be in this cost in that it is part of that 12,000, I think, the 12,200. Part of that is the board retreat from the last year.
The school supplies one?
Yeah, because most of that was food. And going forward, that between the travel and the supply, that would be appropriate, yeah.
Well, the one thing with the board retreat, so 12,212 was for the board retreat?
No, that was for, there's a number of charges for lunches and a number of catering requests. Individual board members have charged many different lunches.
We had trainings, we did have a few trainings, I don't know how many,
Oh, okay.
but where we would. Some of it was.
So that might be where the purchase of the cookies and stuff for staff lived also.
Oh,
Yes,
yes,
it is in
yeah.
there, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
And in terms of trainings, does that also include the cost of a facilitator? Would it be embedded there?
That would be professional service, yeah. So when
So
you-
that would be going up, professional service?
Yeah, that would be part of that 135,000.
And then about the admin retreat, where does that one live?
Admin retreat typically would go against the school budget, and that would be, if it's for the principal, it would go against the principal conference.
I think he was referring to you're referring to the board admin retreat, the combined retreat.
Yeah,
I think there was like a couple,
In June.
many, there
Yeah,
seemed to be
There was a board
several
admin
of
and then
them.
there was a.
the Hermitage
Yeah.
there, that's in the supply line. That's in that
Of
12.
this,
Yeah.
so the June board admin retreat lives under supplies in school?
Yeah, because most of that was food.
Mm-hmm.
So is that just the cost for board members, or is it also the cost
It
for
was for the event.
the event? Okay, okay.
Wasn't that an SU
Yeah.
event?
Because
Maybe it was.
Vernon was there.
Yeah.
The whole
Vernon was
Yeah,
thing.
maybe it was then. If
Yeah.
it was, it would have been against the SU budget.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
I realize that there's a chart of accounts and there's rules you live by, but I'm wondering, I would appreciate having some of those expenses kind of separated out. So to me, what we spend on the cost of food or the cost of engaging a place to stay overnight or renting somewhere out is different than what we pay, and maybe the cost of like engaging a team to help run a retreat goes under professional services. Maybe that's there. So is supplies really just for food, printing related to a retreat, pencils and paper? That's all it is. That's what
Yeah.
supplies is.
Yep.
And we way overspent. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The treats we gave at the end of the year to the different schools, those food platters,
Right.
that was over $6,000 in itself.
Maybe that's why we overspent. So it feels like if we, I think looking back at this past year, I feel like we were not we were relatively lean in terms of how we as a board were operating as far as, we're not getting lunches and things like that. When we had a meal, it was pretty modest. And I do think that investment in a thank you to our staff was critically important. So it would feel appropriate to think about increasing that budget line item if what we spent in the last year was realistically what we might spend again. With kind of dealing with our own intake of consuming food pretty lean, and also having some kind of thank you. I think that would be a good idea. Personally.
when I go through the warrants, I can see all these expenditures, who made them, where it is, you know, you can track everything, and I did a whole accounting at the end of the year last year in terms of schools by, you know, presenting their staff with lunches and so forth, in addition to which the board did. And so I would love it if it was a more cohesive plan, rather than the board just saying, let's make this available. I mean, that was, as Tim just pointed out, it was multiple thousands of dollars to do that. And it was towards the end of the year. And a lot of those other things had already been done by individual schools. So I'd be interested in sort of tightening up, I think as Ruby suggested, tightening up how the expenditures are initiated, and because it is more than just the board doing it.
I think that's a really good suggestion. You know, we have a procurement manual, we're under an audit review right now. One of those basic audit tenets is, do we follow our own procedures? And our procurement manual is designed so that when we spend our millions of dollars in federal money, we don't have to 2 years later give it back because we didn't follow a procurement requirement. And the board's procurement has been deviated from our procurement procedure for the district. And I think that would be a good thing. It's a relatively new board in the context of a Union High School that was formed in 1956. We haven't probably had that conversation, and I think it would be good. Just because you were talking about it, I just looked at last year. Here's the 12,400 that you were just looking at, Ruby, by vendor. Everyone's books, $194. There's only a few of these. Guilford Country Store, $1,900. Hangry Traveler, $3,520. That's probably
That was the teacher gifts.
Tim the Seal, $1,560. I assume that's reimbursements for lunches. Putney General Store, $1,288. David's Gold, $753. It's only a couple more. Deborah Stanford, $443. Trend Business, $1,130. Vermont Country Deli, $286. Vermont School Boards Association, $157. And reimbursing the SU for Zoom, $1,197. That's your $12,459. So the discussion about the board retreat, that must have been at the SU level.
And then we had stipends for the student reps, 500 each.
Yeah, and that doesn't come out of supplies.
Can you say more about the procurement manual and how would we become aligned with those guidelines?
It's on our website. It is absolutely something that we put a great deal of time and effort into because it is a very high risk. If we don't procure according to the Federal Register, we will have to give money back. You may recall in the news a few years ago, Bellows Falls had to give back $1.1 million in special ed reimbursements because they didn't follow a protocol that's established by the state. It's a very real thing. That's why Paul gets so many accolades around grant management, is that he's one of the most expert people in the state, and he helps us as a team, collaborate around procurement. So it's on our website under finance in the documents. I certainly can send folks a link, but it's a 200-page document, but it does break down each element of spending. Probably 100 pages are the federal compliance requirements, and we align our local spending with the federal compliance. Federal compliance says you will not buy food with federal money. There's like 2 or 3 exceptions, but so generally we don't authorize spending food, public money on food unless it's, as Sean's pointing out, fundraisers. Your student activity fundraiser, absolutely, we raise a lot of money. We raise $400,000 a year with our student fundraisers, and a lot of that is buying and selling food. But anyways, I think Sean's point's a good one, and Ruby, these are good questions that help us kind of all get on the same page.
And then I have one last question, which you kind of addressed at the beginning about dues and fees, that I think the VSBA has moved over to the SU, is that what you said?
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess a question I have, which I mean, this is a real query, is the VSBA enough for us? So is there some other association, is there some other support for this board? I feel at moments, I think we're kind of edging our way towards effective systems, but I think that there's ways in which I feel that this board could use support, and I wonder to what degree is there some way in which that's a budget line item that could be utilized for something other than the VSBA, or is the VSBA doing exactly what it needs to and is all the support we need? I don't know that we're going to answer that question right now. But when I saw that and I saw that we'd only spent 94, it's helpful to think about, it's just kind of moved over to the SU. But I think it's a moment for us to ask ourselves, are we getting the support that we need? Bigger conversation for another time, maybe. And I don't feel equipped to answer it. I don't know the lay of the land.
I will say the VSBA has been a great start.
Yeah.
Because just a couple of years ago, we didn't have a relationship with that organization. So we've made great progress in taking that step.
Yeah.
So.
Do we have any other questions, thoughts, etc.?
Can I just pencil in the consensus then? So we're going to leave the 135.
Well, I guess I would like to, we have to, another item on the admin assistant to the board.
Right.
My feeling is that I would like the board to come back to the 9th. I know that's cutting it close for you, Frank, but on the, I know on the 9th, I'd like the board to come back with, these are my suggested listings for each of these categories, and we need to haggle it out, figure it out. So hopefully the end of that evening, we would be able to give Frank what our, these are our numbers. So I think there's a lot that Frank has explained to us and kind of clarified for us, and I think it's a lot to kind of take in, and I'd like everyone to sort of try and absorb it some more before we then say these are our numbers. And we also have this admin assistant that we need to talk about. So, and I am mindful that of timing for you to get these to you. So.
Yep. Okay.
So we could talk about that, or we, unless I guess I'm of the mind that we should just go back to the order that we were going into, and I'm not seeing any objections to that. So, just get the times. Thank you, Frank, for helping us to go through that. That was really helpful. So now we are going to go back to the clerk's report. And is there a motion to approve the minutes of December 12, 2023?
So moved.
Thank you, Anne. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of December 12, 2023, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. Now we will go to public comment, non-agenda items. So, anyone making a comment can expect a response that falls into one of the following categories. Receive an acknowledgement of the comment with no further action planned. Receive an immediate response by the board chair or administration. Administration would be directed to contact and respond to the person. Clarification sought from the administration for a specified meeting. The topic would be added to a specified future board agenda. The matter would be referred to an executive session. a public hearing would be held on the matter. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment on public comment non-agenda items? Okay, I'm gonna ask a second time, public comment non-agenda items. And going 3 times before we move on. Hearing none, we are moving on. 7:36. Okay. So we are going to unfinished business. The only item there is the sexual abuse investigation. I do need to schedule an executive session for the board to speak with the board's attorney. That unfortunately was not able to be accommodated by this agenda. It's already a very full agenda. So hopefully that's coming up. And if no one on the board has any questions, I'll go right to Mindy. Okay, Mindy?
Hi. So I guess I'm wondering which attorney? Are you talking about a meeting with Kendall Huxt?
Yes, I am.
And so you're not going to, so I thought that Attorney Goddard was presenting a report, and does that need to be further filtered through another lawyer? Is that what's happening?
I will tell you that, or remind you, I think it should be clear, this has been the way that we've gone through, is we've gone through Kendall, Attorney Kendall Host. She is the, we have not had much, if any, direct contact with Attorney Goddard, and that was per the request of the community, so that we were not involved in the investigation. So our communication has been through Attorney Kendall Host, and I'll be scheduling an executive session for the board to have a conversation with her as soon as possible. I did have to amend the agenda to add a couple other items on there, and that this agenda was not able to accommodate a conversation with her this evening.
I guess I'm wondering about the board's ongoing commitment to transparency, because that's what the board promised from the beginning. And it seems like at this point, everything gets filtered through multiple attorneys. And I'm wondering how much of Attorney Goddard's findings are you going to filter or edit, and how much is actually going to be presented to the public?
Well, I can't predict the future, so some of those questions I will unfortunately not be able to respond to. The board is committed to transparency, and I have tried to be clear on the evenings that we have been waiting for something from Attorney Goddard to provide to our attorney. And this is another evening, but we are closer to it. Unfortunately, if you are looking at the agenda on the website, you will see we have 3 executive sessions. None of them are involving the sexual abuse investigation. There are other items that are necessary for this evening, and if you look at the agenda, you will see that the third executive session goes to 9:25, and unfortunately, the board's time just will not be able to accommodate a 4th executive session for the evening. So that's essentially all I have for you.
And so does that mean that you won't have something prepared for the next meeting also? Or
Thank you for the questions. Unfortunately, I can't predict the future, so I do not know. You had asked in the past for me to indicate on the agenda if it was an evening where there was going to be something specific that was shared with the public. I am committed to doing that. I have not had anything, so the agenda item has remained on the agenda, on every single agenda, and it has remained the same because I have not had anything any report to share.
Okay, I would just mention that we're coming up on 2 years since the investigation opened officially, since Attorney Goddard was engaged to do this. And I thought we were told that the investigation was wrapping up months ago. I'm just mentioning that.
Thank you very much for reminding us that. I will clarify that some of the time was Attorney Goddard was out for some medical reasons and was unavailable. That is not something that the board can control, And we have done the best we can to try and get answers. And again, I will be scheduling an executive session at some point in the near future for the board to have a discussion. And that's essentially all I have for you this evening. Jody, I did see that you had your hand up. Did you have something you needed to share or question?
My hand was up. By mistake, I'm waiting for the next thing to come up. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I'll try to be mindful of that. Okay. So we are moving on. Okay. And so the next thing is Leadership Council updates. Do we have any Leadership Council updates? I realized that we met last week, so there might not be a huge rush to, okay, and I don't see any hands, any indication from any of the board members, so Jody, if you would like to share for your question, concern, thoughts.
Okay, Kelly, thank you. I am concerned. I'm not able to go to the Dummerston Leadership Council because of prior commitments on their days, and because the leadership councils do not want to be filmed or anything like that. I'm finding the minutes too minimal, and I would like to ask that the minutes for the leadership councils be more inclusive as to what's really being talked about. I don't like the manner that they've been presented, so I would just like to pass that on. I don't look at the other ones, so I don't know how it works with everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jody. I assume that all the board members will take that information back to the leadership councils they're on and indicate that. Okay, so we will be moving on, unless last call for leadership councils. Okay, we are moving on to board subcommittees. Any? Ruby.
The Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee met just 2 days ago. I forwarded around the minutes to the board. They'll be posted on the website shortly. I wanted to raise this at this meeting, knowing that this is just kind of putting it out there, and there'll could be more conversation at later meetings or meetings with other parties if needed. So the conversation that we had at the committee was around equity in food access at our schools. How is that going from school to school? That's been something that has come up at board meetings and in the press, and so we had a good conversation. I shared some conversations I've had with a number of other parties around who have an interest in exploring or thinking about what it would mean and what would it look like if our district as a whole had an independent food service system. And so I'm not going to read the minutes, but if you look at the minutes once they're posted, that will give you a sense of what that what was shared around those other conversations. But essentially, it feels like it feels like from a board level, thinking about how are each of our schools in our district schools, how are they experiencing food, access to food, what is it like for the students, what's it like for the staff, what's it like for the administration at each of those schools. I think that from the committee's perspective, that feels like a worthwhile endeavor to think about, and but understanding that the budget related to food right now is actually in the world of the SU for the most part, and so what we decided is that we would raise this issue at the SD level, allow for conversation maybe at a future meeting to talk about what the thoughts are in this group, and then ultimately there may be trying to ask for a conversation at the SU level seemed like it would be appropriate. There certainly are, my understanding from this, a meeting or conversations I've had with a few different stakeholders or people interested in an independent food system, one of whom is Susan Grabowski, who she's mentioned in this meeting before, or in a board meeting before, that there's a grant that's specifically related to Dummerston in terms of explorations around independent food service. And there also is I understand that there's a Patrick Leahy farm to school grant that the deadline is like looming next month. We're not making that deadline of mid-January, but that's an example of the kind of grant, a grant program that might be really instrumental if we were to want to move towards, take steps towards independent food systems. That being said, it feels a little bit, the conversations around these things kind of feel fraught, because ultimately in order to move towards an independent food system, you have to say, this is where we're moving. And that's an uncomfortable thing to say when we're talking about the budget implications are really dire. And a move like that is actually a big investment. And I think that without knowing it's hard to look at our school, thinking about moving to independent is a very difficult analysis, it feels like, because there's so many, the money is in so many different little places, and it doesn't always speak the same language. I say that, being someone who lives in Putney and has been thinking about this for a long time. So anyway, all of that came up at our meeting. I don't expect that this will be, something we'll talk about at length at all really here, but I think that our committee feels like we're ripe for talking about this, and so it would be nice to have it on a future agenda. We also recognize that there were questions we had or thoughts we had about what would we need, what information basically that we'd be asking Frank, and we are not asking Frank because it's the middle of budget season. So, but getting ourselves ready for what things will we want to pounce on Frank for as soon as he's free might be a good idea.
I do think it's important to define the problem that we're solving here, and that we've just had this conversation about food quality and about resources and scale. So that's just obviously it's an obvious point, but always important to look at the best way to serve our students and adapt, evolve. Yeah, so I'm always looking to innovate, but we really want to be specific about what problem are we solving.
Jim?
I asked about the farm to school grants when we went over the budget in SU, and my understanding is that sometimes they're just one time only. So the school gets it 1 year, they can't get it the next. So we might be getting as many farm to school grants as possible. I don't know.
They write the specifications for the grant. What is the grant designed to fund, and that evolves based on their funding availability. Recently, it's been getting certain pieces of equipment installed so certain programs can run. It's a very small component, though, of running the $2.4 million food service program. I can't imagine farm to school grants would carry much at all.
Can I raise a question about the personnel committee?
Sure.
So, just as a small way of streamlining what we do, you meet to approve 1% funding. To my knowledge, a 1% funding request has never been denied. Is that necessary? Can we defer that decision to use 1% funding to the administration, to the administrators? Why do we have to approve $1,000 for a 1% funding project for a school.
It has been denied in the past.
Right.
It's not common
Oh,
because
yeah.
they often run it by administrators who are willing to tell them, hey, that's not a very good idea.
No.
But yeah, it has been in the past, and I believe this. I'm not sure how this works, but I think that the school board approval is required by law.
That's what my question.
Am I wrong about that?
No, it is in the collective bargaining agreement,
Okay.
but you certainly can delegate that to the administration.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those things that are implied that it's a board decision that the board has traditionally delegated to the administration.
We can, I suppose, discuss it next March when we talk about committees, but I would be very much in favor of just deferring 1% funding to the administration.
I do have, so because I'm in the social justice committee, and we've had a lot of environmental disasters in Vermont, including what happened this Monday. I have been seeing more interest in environment, sustainability, and a new word that's coming up a lot is resilience. How are we resilient? What systems can we do to support the community? And the schools, people are having a lot of conversations about schools because there's an anticipation that if the worst happens, like you're gonna probably have people showing up in the school for shelter, for food, like to charge up energy. Maybe schools could be like energy hubs, like because they have like these energy super battery packs that Tesla's doing right now. So there's a lot of conversation happening, and it might be something for us to think about going into next year is maybe having an energy or resilience or an environmental committee that provides a place for people to come and talk about this, because we hope for the best, but you know, if the floods happen like last year, unfortunately Vermont is like we're very lucky to have as much water as we do, but there is that consequence that it's too much, and we were very lucky that we our systems were able to sustain itself on Monday. So just something to think about.
Yeah. Just a brief response, Ego. I think that is important. I think that's more of like a town management committee. So typically during a crisis like the floods or huge snowstorm that went on for 3 days like we had last year, that's a function of like the Red Cross coming into town, working with the emergency responders, communicating with school personnel. So it's a very much a interwoven process that currently the Red Cross typically takes the point for large scale crisis events. Aside from that, it's more like town manager, emergency responders, and then communicating with the school system around what's available to support and manage the crisis. But you're right, it's important because we see more and more events as time goes on.
Can I just respond to what Tim said? Tim, I've wondered the same thing for a long time, and you know, I think when we spend $65 million and all of it goes through a finance, you know, it goes through the board anyway, but for some reason this much smaller amount of money gets really like scrutinized heavily, and there's a ton of paperwork involved with 1% applications. So my admin assistant spends a lot of time trying to organize 1% requests and put them in and get them to Mo at the central office, who goes to the board, everybody's got to sign off. I support looking into that more myself.
I'm wondering if there aren't more items like that maybe in the future between admin and the board, we could look at things that for efficiency purposes and you know, that we could look at, you know, reworking, seeing what would work better.
to speak to that, I was in a VSBA orientation, I think, new member orientation, and there was a really interesting moment when a number of different existing boards talked about their processes around warrants, and I do think that a number of districts delegate that, not at the board level also, which, so delegate it to the finance committee, for example. So I think that it would be an interesting question to ask, like maybe have a few of us put out feelers of different systems and how do you operate, what do you do, and to self-evaluate, I think would be good.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else on board subcommittees, we're going to move on. I did budget 15 minutes for the admin assistant. This is, again, something that my expectation is we come back to the night and we have our numbers and we're ready to hand them over to Frank. So I want to have that very quick conversation, and then we will be taking a 5-minute break before we go into our 3 executive sessions. So, does anybody want to start off the conversation about the admin assistant? Any thoughts?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think that crunching numbers is we're gonna have to do that, but I think we are extremely under-resourced in the world of administrative support. So I was really happy that you brought it up and that we're talking about it seriously. And that's all I got.
Okay.
I think it's a fantastic idea as well. And my wish for this position is that we might find somebody who is skillful in navigating the digital world. Some of the efficiencies that I'm hoping at least I believe we are hoping we might find in this position, are going to require a skill set that has this, not just summarizing minutes or meeting notes. My hope is that we have somebody that can really find a digital integration for the board and efficiencies therein.
So I'll just say, we currently do have that in place through Mo Hart, who's the assistant at the superintendent's office. I know it's late tonight, but she did send a document to Kelly, who I'm sure will send to the rest of the board, just identifying all of the tasks that she currently manages for the board. And I think we should get a much better understanding of what's already in place before we're thinking of adding a new position.
I can say, and I did actually get that, and I didn't get it in time to send it, so that is certainly, thank you for bringing that up. This is, I think the 3 things that I'm thinking were discussed were the binder, getting that in electronic format, and I think it's getting that there, and it's getting and maintaining it, maintaining with an eye towards updates. There were a couple other things, but one of them was the
rotation of policies, some kind of a spreadsheet to manage what we're doing on the policy committee.
And there was something else. Tim, do you remember?
Mine usually like arranging locations for board retreats, stuff like that.
And the Google Drive.
The Google Drive.
Making sure that those resources, and I see this as a person to complement what Mo is doing, because she is doing a fantastic job and we rely on her. And but I think that on the board side of things, there are just some other things like administrative things that I don't know that it's fair or whether Mo would have the time to.
So I would just ask, let's take a close look at what's currently in place. A worry that I have, and I'll just be frank, is developing 2 systems that don't work together and create silos. I think that could become very complicated. If it's looking at ways to support what's already happening, I think that's a much different conversation than how it first perceived the position.
It's not taking away the tasks that she's doing already. It's tasks that are independent of that. Sean?
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking historically what Barb always did and how incredible she was at doing all these things that are being brought up. And I think Mo is moving into, total comfort in being able to do everything that needs to be done. And as you mentioned, Mark, if you have two people trying to do one thing, then very often it's better just to have one person doing the whole scope. Because otherwise the communication alone can take as much time as the implementation.
Robin?
I think that what is being identified here, though, is that even though Mo is doing an amazing job with all of the ways that she does, like some of her job responsibilities are directly supporting the board, there is things that people feel are falling on the shoulders of the board members to do and that are like beyond our capacity. So I don't want to like assume what the intention of this was, but to me, I felt as if this was proposed in order to not be like, okay, Mo, could you do all of these other additional responsibilities beyond what you're already doing and make her job be more than a full-time workload? And that's why this.
I guess that's what I'm saying. I think a starting point was to really get super educated on what she is providing. Because when you look at it in a document, I think you gain a different perspective, and it may help with identifying what's missing as well.
Well, I will send that out, and so then this is another thing that we need to come back to the next meeting with. I see. I was told that you have your hand up, so I won't. But I think we need to come back to the next meeting and have a concrete. This is how we. After having looked at the job responsibilities that Mo already covers and looking at the proposal that was already sent out, and so we need, and then we will need to come back with that in order to determine whether it's something that will be in the board's budget. And Mark, Paul.
I'm a little confused and I want to clarify. The board is considering hiring a part-time salaried position that is reportable to the board.
Yes.
And as far as I read statute, the board doesn't have the authority to do that.
I'm not sure that's true, but I believe
it would at least be.
We will certainly be reaching out to Pietro, our attorney, but I believe that that was. I believe that it's possible, but I will reach out to Pietro and make sure that obviously that what we do is legal. So,
and I don't. You're using the word hire. I mean, I think one of the reasons this is coming up is because we are discussing our budget. You know, and so it would be capturing in that the budget. What if we wanted to increase the support, the amount of support that's needed? What that looks like, whether it's someone who already exists in the district who has space and is allocated there, or it's a new person. What it is different than the commitment to wanting this thing. That's my question.
Yeah, the work could be done by someone hired in the central office reporting to Mark.
I think that's what. Well, I've always assumed that's.
That was my question is the report. If it's somebody that Mark by statute hires, because he's the one that's supposed to that does that piece of it, that person would presumably be in the central office and would be in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Not, I thought I was hearing a proposal to have somebody entirely independent and reporting only to the board.
I'm not sure. I'll reach out to Pietro and ask if there is a what sort of requirements or there would be, and we'll get some clarification. I will get clarification before the next board meeting and provide it to the board.
But I just want to. I think we should be really clear that where that conversation goes is nuts and bolts in the structure of who and the how do we hire. But the question before that is do we want this thing? You know, and the thing doesn't mean like we want, you know, I don't think the thing is, do we want someone who's reporting just to us who has nothing to do with Mark? Like, that's not the thing. The thing is, do we want more support with X, Y, and Z? You know, Google Drive and the, you know, like whatever the things are. And so I don't want us to get really bogged down in that like, no, we can't do it that way, because we're not talking about a way. We're talking about what support we need. Sorry.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns before we take a break?
I just want to bring up, this is very analogous to the position that we already proposed, invented, and hired, which is a board recorder.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need to invent a new way of doing it. That was a position added to the central office staff that Mark hired and supervises, even though all of her work is just supporting the board with taking minutes. So we don't need to like invent a new way of doing it. We can just do things the same way that we're already doing it. If that is the thing that we want to do.
Makes sense.
All right, so it is 8:06. We will take a 5-minute break and come back, and we will be going into an executive session, and we will be inviting Carrie Amidon. It is 8:16. Are we?
Yeah.
Are we all set?
I think.
Oh, we have to go into it up here.
We are recording.
Okay, so it's 8:16. Thank you for your patience. We were a few minutes delayed. So I'm going to ask if there, oh goodness, where am I? I'm going to ask if there is a motion to find that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage, with the understanding that there will be a separate motion to go into executive session under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or employment or evaluation of a public officer or employee, provided the public body shall make a final decision to hire or appoint a public officer or employee in an open meeting and shall explain the reasons for its final decision during the open meeting. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Deborah. All those in favor of that finding, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay. So now, is there a motion to go into executive session under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or employment or evaluation of a public officer or employee, provided the public body shall make the final decision to hire or appoint a public officer or employee in an open meeting and shall explain the reasons for its final decision during the open meeting, and inviting in Carrie Amidon?
So moved.
Thank you, Deborah. Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay. We are in executive session at 8:18. I do not expect any action to be taken. Hopefully it will be a brief one, because we have executive session at 8:53. That took a little bit longer than I anticipated. So we are going into executive session 2 of 3. So I'm going to ask if there is a motion to find that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage, with the understanding that we will be going into an executive session under 1 VSA 313A1F, confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the body. Is there such a motion for that finding?
So made.
Thank you, Tim. Any discussion? All those in favor of that finding, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you. Then can I have a motion to go into executive session under 1 VSA 313A1F, confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the body, and inviting in Attorney John Klesch and Mark Spino.
You're gonna say attorney, Mark.
I was. Is there such? Wait, we're not gone yet. Is there such a fund? Thank you, Kim. Oh, no, that's the actual motion. Thank you, Kim, for that motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? Okay, we are in executive session at 8:55. Okay, so we are back from executive session at 9:13. So we have one last executive session, and, do we have a quorum out here? 1, 2, 3, 4, no, we don't,
I would keep.
okay.
5,
Are
6,
we
7.
ready to go back into the last executive session? Okay, so I'm going to ask if there is a motion to find that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or person involved at substantial disadvantage.
Sure, letting people in.
Let me know when I can. With the understanding that we will be, a motion will be made to go into executive session under 1 VSA 313A1D grievances other than tax grievances. Is there such a motion for that finding?
So moved.
Thank you, Kim. All those in favor of that finding, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you. So now, is there a motion to go into executive session under 1 VSA 313A1D grievances other than tax grievances, with the expectation that the board will go into executive session for 2 minutes, and then we will be inviting in Superintendent Spino and members of the union.
So moved.
Thank you, Kim. All those in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. We are in executive session.
Will there be any action?
There will, not this evening.
So
9:15.
BCTV can go.
Yes, you can go. 9:15.